guys, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader, and today I'm here to do my May wrap-up. Now it's hot, unfortunately upstairs it becomes like an oven by this time of the day, so I had to open the window or I'd be dead in like 15 minutes. So apologize because it might be a bit more noisy than usual because there are a lot of kids running around in the streets this hour after school and all of that, so sorry. As the title suggests, I have outdone myself this month and I've read a total of 17 things. Now these 17, one was a graphic novel, manga actually, 4 were audiobooks, 12 were actual physical books. Considering that May was the month where I had my university exams and I was working while doing the exams, the fact that I managed to read 17 things and most of all 12 physical books, I'm so bloody proud of myself. I've been failing constantly my reading 10 books TBR a month since the beginning of January. I came very close a couple of times but I never read all 10, and this month I did it despite how busy and how stressful the month was. I guess because reading is my escape, so instead of watching a lot of TV I read a lot when I got free time. So that helped. It also helped the fact that I have very short books, so I did have a bit of help in those things, but I'm still proud of myself. Just let me be for this month. And the total amount of pages was 3,672 pages that I've read, just physical books, no mangas and no audiobook included. In terms of gender, I've read 6 things by male authors and 11 things by a female author. In terms of year, 4 things were between 900 and 2000 and 13 things were published between 2000 and 2020, no new release. As mentioned before, of my TBR completed 10 out of 10 prompts. In terms of targeted audience, 2 books were young adult, 15 books things were targeted for adults. In terms of stars, 2 things were in the range of 1 star, 5 things were in the range of 3 stars, 4 things were in the range of 4 stars, and 5 things were in the range of 5 stars. And finally, in terms of genre, I've read 2 literary fiction, 3 horror, 6 non-fiction, 1 dystopian and 4 fantasy. And of the fantasy, 1 was a comic fantasy, 1 was an erotica fantasy, and 1 was a fable and erotica genre. I've put 1 each, but 1 could definitely be categorized in both genre. Actually, I think it would be more fable than erotica, but it was a prompt for erotica fantasy, so I'm gonna leave it at that. And 1 I categorize as court intrigue. I go in chronological order. So first thing I finished this month was an audiobook, Fortuna's Worn by K.J. Sutton. This is a court intrigue fantasy. This is kind of / urban fantasy as well, now I think about it. And it's about this woman and she is the last of her kind, and one day she is whisked off to the fairy realm because of a series of events that I don't want to spoil, and she goes there and she has to marry a fairy in order to achieve a goal of hers. And I'm gonna leave this very, very vague. It's kind of silly courts and court intrigue and all of that. If you read The Cruel Prince, if you read a bit of Sarah J. Maas and all of that, it's along those lines. Now, I thought this started very strong. I was very enticed at the beginning, and I think the fact that this girl had some powers and she was something that I had never seen before in terms of following the POV and having that kind of main character as protagonist of our book. So I was very interested. And then when we get more into the court intrigue and the romance, although it's not too heavy on the romance, it's definitely there, but it's not all about that. I kind of lost interest a little bit, and I guess one thing that didn't help was I didn't particularly love any of the love interests. So when I read this kind of fantasy, if I don't click with the love interest or there is nothing peculiar overall about the story, I tend to just end up being like meh about the story, which is how I feel about this. But I do like our main protagonist. I might one day continue on with the series. I've not made my mind up yet regarding continuing on or not. For sure I will try the audiobooks. I didn't mind them. A lot of people complain about this being very similar to the plot of A Court of Thorns and Roses. At the moment while I was reading that, I didn't notice that much inside. Yes, there are some elements that are in common, but I didn't compare them necessarily all the times. But yeah, there are definitely elements that remind of that. And yeah, that's what I have to say about this. Then, for ending series TBR, I finally listened to Ignite Me by Tahara Mafi. This is a YA dystopian novel. First book, Juliette, our protagonist, she has a very peculiar power for which if she touches someone, she sucks the life out of them. And because of that, her parents have abandoned her, and she is, well, she doesn't have any interaction with any human. And I think, if I remember correctly, at the beginning of the first book, she's captured by the bad guys as she wants to be used as weapon for them or something of the sort. Now, this is a very popular YA series back 12 years ago, I don't even know, and I missed the train and didn't love the first and second installment as much as pretty much everybody else did. And again, I think I was probably too old. I'm not very passionate about dystopian novels in general, but I wanted to keep reading because I never understand why people are so committed to the couple in it. And I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm just gonna say the couple, but you know what I mean. And I wanted to see how people fell in love with this couple so much. And I guess by the end of the third one, I got it. I could see it, and I definitely was fascinated by him. Again, I'm not gonna name in case I was spoiled, which annoyed and ruined the whole experience, I believe, so I'm not gonna do the same. But I get it. But in order to make my last point, I need to spoil it a tiny bit. I'm not gonna say any name of what we get in the end, but I need to spoil it a tiny bit, so I'm gonna keep it like this in case you want to read this and you haven't. But I just wish that we would get to the end couple without Adam having to turn out to be a piece of shit for us to justify Juliette in our minds and justify her change of heart. People can change their mind, especially when you're 17, 16, whatever. So just wished there wasn't such a destruction of Adam as a character for us to believe then she could move on, basically. A critique I do have is that if this was to be left as a trilogy, the ending was very abrupt, and I didn't necessarily appreciate how things didn't have a closure, because I guess for a bunch of years we didn't know if we were ever gonna get a sequel. I don't know if I'm gonna commit to the sequel. It's more likely than I want, and I'm gonna just think this as a trilogy as it was, I guess, supposed to be at the beginning. But 3.5 stars. I didn't mind the third installment. I think between the three, this is definitely the one I enjoyed the most. Now I'm gonna insert a clip of me talking about the 5, which was non-fiction choice for actually April, and Jack the Ripper, which was my true crime choice for April, which I was behind. So I read more than half of both in May. Okay, past Eva here to review actually 2 books that I was carrying over from April into May, which are the non-fiction pick for April, which was The 5 Untold Lives of a Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Ellie Rubenhold, and Jack the Ripper by Philip Sudgen, the complete history of Jack the Ripper actually. And this was the pick for April for the true crime. And of course, as you can imagine from the title, I chose to read these together because it made a lot of sense to have a complete picture of what was going on in 1888 in London. This is a true crime book written by a historian fascinated by Jack the Ripper, about all the investigation and the crimes and all of that. And this is another book written by another historian, but this time she focuses only on the victims, so only of the canonic 5 victims and their stories. So she doesn't get to a point where they are actually killed. She doesn't describe any of the mutilations and any of the conditions of the body are found. She stops each story around the day or the night that they're killed without giving any details of the actual crime. I give this 5 stars. I think this is a true gem because a lot of people are fascinated by Jack the Ripper, the crime themselves. A lot of people will want to read these. If I can just show you properly. while many won't be as interested or didn't stop and think about, okay, what about the victims? The only criticism I have about this book, if I have to find any, is that she delves into the lives of only the 5 canonic victims. However, if you do a bit of research and you read, for example, these, it is clearly obvious that there are probably around 7 to 9 victims, and a couple of those are, for example, Martha Tabrum. It's probably like 99% a victim of Jack the Ripper, and she should have deserved a place in this book. However, this is a very fascinating jump back in time to follow the lives of these 5 women from their birth to around the time they died, and how did they end up in the streets, how did they end up in the Whitechapel. And one of the most important things that Helly Rubenold does is saying that there is no proof that any of these women, apart from a couple, were actually sex workers and they were engaging in any kind of prostitution at all. So she is kind of debunking the myth of, oh, Jack the Ripper just killed sex workers, and instead she is showing us a new side of how Jack the Ripper was actually preying on the most poor women that sometimes just ended up living rough in the streets because they didn't have money to pay for a bed, which is a very fascinating story. Because the thing that I found fascinating in here is pretty much one of the biggest critiques that I have about this book. For a man obsessed as Sargent was with proofs and finding what truly happened, he calls throughout all the book these women and consider them as prostitutes, and he talks about them in, I'd say, not very kind terms. He's not misogynistic and he does not say anything particularly offensive. However, he dismissed them, which kind of bothered me, because again, there is no proof that at least the majority of these women were sex workers. So, you literally put together a very lengthy and very dense read, and he throws shit at other people that have made judgment or that have given informations to readers that are inaccurate. So he's very obsessive with informations and actual documents, which is fair enough, absolutely. But I found funny how he didn't apply himself and his research to the victim as much as he did in all the rest. So you get detailed descriptions of the mutilations and the parts of the body that were missing and the injuries, and you get them at least 3 times for each victim, if not more, repeated and repeated. So a lot of gore is inside this book, and yet he couldn't even bother to research the victims properly. So I'd say if you want to read these, you probably should read these as well. Who are interested in serial killers and all of that, the victims might sometimes help you understand their motivations and ultimately catch the killer. So it is important to have an idea of who the victims are, and in here are very much dismissed. Overall, I cannot not praise the man who's not alive anymore. He's now in heaven with, the god of everything that's sugary and delicious, and I hope he's having a good time. When he was alive, he did a lot of research and put together a book that he is judged to this day is one of the most comprehensive and accurate documentation of Jack the Ripper, his crimes and potential suspects. Now, this book is peppered of things that are very much frustrating. Despite recognizing that times were different, that the technology wasn't there, I still found myself very frustrated because the technology they had, such as photography and all that, they didn't use. So for how much Sargent wants to praise the police and how they handled the thing, I'd say that actually they made a mess. They handled it very poorly, the police, and this guy should have been caught multiple times, and they didn't. From the way they interviewed witnesses, the way these witnesses were presented with potential suspects, so the lineups, a witness identification, any of those procedures were butchered. And for example, one point there was probably a sentence written by the Ripper on a wall, and they cancelled it without even thinking about taking a photography. Whoever made that decision should be fired. Like, I get that you're not used to serial killers, I get that this was completely new, but at the same time it's just logic. It's just, the bare minimum. You take a picture because you will need to have any proof of the calligraphy of the killer, so then you can link it to any correspondence that you might get from him in the future, which they did get. And they were unable to decide if it was the same person or that, or if it was a scam or whatever, just because we didn't have anything from the killer. And this is just to mention something. So Sergeant praised the police. I don't. I honestly think that despite the limited tools they had at the time, they still did a very fucking awful job. Jack the Ripper himself, what a dude. I honestly, even me, like, you know, being kind of familiar with a lot of serial killers, I still find him extremely disturbing. And there are four main suspects described in these. I'd say that one is ridiculous, but it's even mentioned, and probably the second as well. There are a couple, and especially Chapman, that are very interesting. However, again, I don't understand why there is a lot of information about what the police did on the night of murder and all that, and who saw what. But when it comes down to the actual suspects, data and a lot of research is just not there. It seems like the police, all of that, a lot of archives, documents are lost, and I am baffled on how such a thing could be lost. Like, we're talking about one of the first serial killers in history that made such a huge impact all over the world, and you just lose fucking documents about the case. And we're talking about like 120 years ago. It was 1888 when they started. So it's just ridiculous. It's just frustrating. This is dense. It can get boring because a lot of information we don't need. He repeats things 1,000 times. He delves into things that are totally irrelevant, and it doesn't focus on some other things. But I could not lower the rating past 4, because at the end of the day, you have to recognize that this guy made a lot of effort and put a lot of hours into making this, and he's a very descriptive, detailed recollection of what happened during the crime. If you're looking into history of the victims or more details about the potential suspects and all of this probably is not the best. But in terms of being honestly there second by second from when the corpse is found to the following inquest and what the police did in those days, this is definitely the most accurate you can get. One of the most disturbing and fascinating things is that all these crimes committed by Jack the Ripper were committed in the matter of seconds. So he literally butchered these women in 5 minutes time, and then he was gone, and no one got it, and no one saw the blood on him. So I doubt that someone who's not medically trained would be able to silence the victim, because no one heard ever anything. And some of these victims were killed just below people living in, you know, with flat weather, like in the yard of a house full of people living there. So no one heard a thing, and the killer got away very quickly, which to me indicates a very well knowledge of the area. And I personally think that someone who's possibly living locally, or lives or goes to work there every day, so is very familiar with the area or grew up in the area. That's why Chapman is so fascinating. And in the last killing, there was someone who saw the man, so who saw the face of the potential killer. So that might be why Chapman decided to move to America, where there was actually a case similar, like a victim, a sex worker killed, like kind of Jack the Ripper style, in USA. And then when he comes back, Chapman, in 1901, starts killing off his wives until 12 years later, or pretty much, he's caught and hanged. So one of the things that was said in here was, well, how can someone who's butchering women in those awful ways could then just resume to poisoning and just stop it? It's not unheard of. So although Jack the Ripper crimes and the amount of mutilation of the victims would indicate someone who's a lunatic, someone who's clearly out of his mind, it doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't know what he's doing, because the way he got away with it can be very well that the police were completely inept and that people just didn't notice. Could be that he was working in a slaughterhouse, so someone who works in a slaughterhouse, if he comes back covered in blood, can be. But to me, it indicates that whether this man was doing, he knew what he was doing. So he wasn't completely lunatic. He wasn't crazy to the degree that is a rambling mad lunatic that you find in the streets, because those kind of guys would probably not be able to do this and get away with it, not as quickly. So it could be Chapman, to be fair. I think as of now is the most likely one. And there is a picture of a guy in here, and it's like, even just staring at the picture gives me the shivers. But I do recognize that changing the style is not as common, but it's not unheard of. There are serial killer that stops, and there are serial killer who, to mislead, just change their methods. So who knows? I'm not saying that 100% is Chapman. I'm saying that between all these guys that are presented, the 4 suspects presented, is the most likely one. But we will never know, which is so freaking frustrating. And I think I'm kind of done with Jack the Ripper after this, because I mean, I hate not knowing. I really hate not knowing. But it was brilliant reading them together. It was a very dense and consuming read. I found it very emotionally taxing. I don't know why. Maybe because I went on the tour, I saw the places, and then now by diving more into the victims' lives, I could kind of relate more to them, which made all of this more awful and frustrating. But if you are into true crime and you are fascinated by Jack the Ripper, this is a duo that you probably don't want to miss. Then I have read Uzumaki by Junji Ito, and I love these editions. I'm gonna show you some of the art without giving nightmares to pretty much everybody. Once you've read one Junji Ito, all the characters you're gonna see again in other novels, so he draws characters pretty much the same, which is not something that I particularly like as a choice. I respect the choice, I don't particularly like it. And this is a self-contained horror manga where you've got this town where all of a sudden this spiral starts to appear and people start to behave very weirdly, and the whole story revolves around what's going on with the spirals, what's going on with the town, and finding the mystery and the answer to why these spirals are there. I have to say, I love the first 3/4 of these. I think Ito has got such amazing ideas. I love his body horror. It really makes me uncomfortable while I read, which is why I'm there, but I'm also very much fascinated by every issue plot. And I don't understand then how he can keep me glued on my chair and how he can mesmerize me for a huge manga, and each self-contained issue and chapter in the issue, I really like it. I really like the end, the resolution, and then we get to the last quarter and we get to the big end of the entirety of the manga, and I'm left disappointed. And this keeps happening. Everything he does is very strong, apart from the ultimate, let's call it ultimate ending. At the end of the day, I didn't like the final explanation we got of why these spirals are there, and I found a bit meh. I also didn't like any of the bonus chapter we got. I thought they were very unnecessary after such a long manga to begin with. But I will always read everything that Ito puts out. Then I listened to a very quick audiobook by Amanda Ngozi Adichie, and this is We Should All Be Feminist. It's more like kind of very long essays. It's around 45 minutes long audiobook targeted for adults, and it's a non-fiction, of course, and it's the author telling us about why she's a feminist and why she honestly believes that everybody should be. And I definitely am that kind of feminist that the author in this book was. I can definitely see myself in that kind of feminism. The way she explains and the way she's very calm, and she's very also logical. She's someone who says to you, I'm not saying that men and women have the same physical power, for example, have the same physical strength on average. You know, that's not my argument. I'm not discussing biological differences or strength levels. I'm just saying that because we progress as a society today, things are not equal and they should be. And the way she explained this simply, smartly, clearly, it's definitely something I could relate to. And I really enjoyed this. I gave it 5 stars, of course. I loved how she was like, I'm a very strong, independent woman who likes to dress nice sometimes. And I do it for myself. And I'm a feminist, but I don't hate men. That's not why I'm here. I'm not here to be aggressive and hateful toward men. I'm here to make a point across and just say that equality is very much improved compared to back in the days, but we are still not there. Then I have read Going Posta by Terry Pratchett, and this is book number 33 in the Discworld series, and it's the first book in Moist von Week or something of the sort series. I think there are only 2 books in this duology or something of the sort. Moist, yes, his main name is Moist, and he is has become, after this, one of my favorite characters ever. Definitely one of my favorite characters in the Discworld series, which I'm making my way through. This is the story of Moise, who is an outlaw. He's a thief and a scoundrel, and he gets condemned to death, and instead his life is spared by Lord Veterinary, which is the mayor of this big city. And basically Lord Veterinary tells Moise that he can either die for real, or he can go and become a postmaster and put together again the post office that has been kind of out of use for many years now. And of course Moise decided to go and save the post office of the town. Now, only Terry Pratchett could write a book about a postmaster and about a post office and make it one of the best things I've read. In terms of fantasy, comic fantasy, this is definitely one that takes the cake. And it's definitely probably one of my favorite Discworld novel periods. I laughed so much, and all the time I laughed though, I found such a clever construction of a plot and such clever sentences, and he was making a point, and again he was using a postmaster and a post office. It's amazing, like the entertainment and the humor, and at the same time the message in this it was stellar. I honestly recommend this so much. I do always say, you know, read the Discworld series in order because it makes sense. It starts from book number 1, but if you don't want to read them in order and you want to maybe read just duologies or trilogies here and there, this one, it's definitely one that will make you fall in love with Discworld series, and I bet my ass off then after that you're gonna read all of them. Then I have read a book for my book club, which was Circe by Madeleine Miller. I am gonna link down below the video I've done about my book club, how I'm the host and creator of my company book club. And for these bi-monthly we had to read a couple of books, and this was one of the 2 books. So this is, well, it's very famous, again, it's the story of Circe retold by Madeleine Miller with her spin to it. The mythology nerd in me has an hangover after reading this. I loved it. Again, everything that has to do with Greek mythology is usually something I end up very much loving, and if you combine that to very important messages, an amazing prose, and overall a story that keeps you entertained, and that there is definitely a lot of growth of our main character in this. Additional, you know, mythology and stories and characters that if you're a mythology nerd like me, or even if you studied in school mythology or something, you recognize the majority of the names in this. It was just lovely. I ended up giving this 5 stars. Like, it's not the best 5 stars I've ever give, it's not my favorite books of all times or anything of the sort. When I was sitting down and trying to figure out what kind of star rating give to these, I thought, is this something that taught me something? Yes. Is this something that gave very powerful discussion throughout? Yes. Is there something where is character growth? Yes. Is that something that's beautifully written? Yes. Is that something that has a strong ending? Yes. So objectively, I couldn't take away the 5 stars from this, and it does deserve 5 stars in my opinion, just because it gave me all of the things that I thought at the beginning, opening up the first page of this book, that this book should have given me, if it makes sense. Going from one extreme to the other, one book who gave me nothing, if not, I fucking lost 2 hours of my time, 3 hours of my time reading this, 2 hours. The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This is erotica fantasy. It was the fantasy pick for this month, and it was in the erotica subgenre. I'm gonna link down below the video I've done of my TBR of reading every fantasy subgenre. And this is a collection of short stories, and each story is a retelling of a fable. Snow White, Red Riding Hood, and all this, but with a erotica twist to it, pretty much. I was told at the beginning, I was told this as an erotica horror twist to the fables, and I was, well, not turned on at all. I didn't think this sexy, didn't think this was particularly well done in erotica fantasy, anything of the sort. Gross, just zero, like no feelings there. And also it didn't scare me at all. The stories were nonsensical. The ending, I hated all the ending basically. The only reason why this is a 0.5 is because the ending of the first story wasn't too bad, so I liked that one. But also, you know, you got so few pages and you really had, I think, a couple of fables. She retold them twice with different stories and terms in them, but I was like, fucking really, with all the fables out there, you, and with such a short book, you had to tell stories twice to us? You couldn't come up with a different story? I mean, to me they felt the same, so I hope I'm not wrong in this. I'm pretty sure we got toward the end 2 Red Riding Hood takes of the same tale. Also, there were stories like the cat with the boots one. Basically, we are reading a short stories where for the majority of the time this cat is licking his dick, literally. Like, how many times do you have to tell me that this cat is licking his balls? I was honestly reading these and saying, why am I losing my time reading about a cat doing his toiletries? Like, what is the appeal in these? What are you trying to say? I know cats, I had cats growing up, I know what they do. I don't need to read it in a book. Like, that's not content, that's not how you fill pages of a book. 1.5 stars. And to top it all off, sorry, there were a couple of sentences like this one. They had planned a delicious expedition to buy her furs, and she was as eager for the treat as any girl might be. Like, as if any girls wants fur. What kind of girls do you know? Like, I know girls that if you buy them fur or anything of the sort, they will set fire to that gift and to you probably. And I can relate to that as a vegetarian myself. Like, don't fucking dare buy me anything that has real fur in it. So you know what I mean? It's just, I didn't like those kind of sentences, and there were a couple in there that I found very problematic. That's how much I didn't like it, because I throw it twice on the floor by now and I don't feel any guilt. Then I read the non-fiction pick for the month, which was Dispatches from Syria by Janine Di Giovanni, The Morning They Came for Us. Janine Di Giovanni, she is a war journalist, so she goes in places where there is war and she reports on what she sees and the situation. And because I didn't know much about the Syrian situation and I wanted to educate myself, I picked this up many years ago and never got around to read it. And I am ashamed that it took me so much time to read this. This is a book that will haunt me for a long time. I gave this 5 stars, and the reason being is that this is not the best written one, although the prose is really nice, but it's a book that has to be written. This is a book that it needs to be out there. It needs to be in the hands of people who read this and understand what war was like. And we are not talking about 100 years ago war. We're talking about a bunch of years ago. And it's a very, very hard read. It's absolutely devastating read. I've read a few reviews on these, just saying that, oh, you know, this didn't explain exactly the background of the war and how it progressed, and it's not very informative on the reasons and the political movements and the religious movements. There are information on that, there are, but it's not in depth. I don't think she meant to ever write a step-by-step war documentary on why the war was there, what is the reason, who did what, when, what day, and of the political people in there and so on. So you get a bit of that, but I think what she wanted to do is write a book about what she witnessed, about how civilians suffer during wars, and that she did perfectly. So yes, this book jumps you in there. She only speaks about the things she saw firsthand. So she traveled to Syria back and forth a bunch of times, so you have entire months missing. And again, this is a reportage of the horrors of war on the civilians, and I'm so grateful I've read this. The stories of the journalists that she meets through these are horrible. I really felt heavy in my heart when I finished reading this. And finally, I appreciated that throughout all this book, she recognizes how lucky she is. She clearly states, you know, I am here, I'm seeing these things, I'm living through this, but I'm also the one who's gonna go on a plane and go back to Paris and live in my nice flat and have my nice things. So at all times, she does recognize her privilege. And I do admire people like her. I admire people that go in the war journalists. I think they got such bravery, such courage to do so, because it takes a lot, you know, to come out of your nice flat, safe flat in Paris and go where bombs drop and then there are corpses and famine, all of the most atrocious things you can think of. So it takes balls to do this, and I'm so grateful we've got people like her. Then I've read the horror pick for the month, which was Hell House by Richard Matheson. Now, this very creepy book, it's the story of this old man who's dying, and I think he has acquired a house which is supposedly the most haunted house in all USA or something, and he hires a parapsychologist and two mediums, one of which had already escaped the house before and was the only survivor of the house, to go back in the house and finally demonstrates that A, it's just all science and parapsychology can explain the phenomenon of the haunting of the house with science, or B, there is life after death, and by this house being haunted, it means that ghosts are real, so after death there is something. Although, if that's the after death, I wish science was right, I guess. How I describe this book in a few words: The Exorcist meets your porn. That's all you need to know. If you're tired of watching this video, it's too long, and you want to stop it here, that's all you need to know. I went into this expecting the most horror-ish, scary, haunted house story ever. Was I scared? At times. I think it creates a very creepy, eerie atmosphere at times, which is what I was there for. I think it was definitely gross, and the fact that this was gross and the gross moments is what kind of kept me interested, because at the end of the day, if you read horror, you want to be scared, you want to be having an entertaining plot, or be grossed out, or whether is that horror can do for you. But the ending of these I found very weak. I thought all this build up and then that's the end. Really? Also, can we, these parapsychologists, what are you an expert of? Parapsychology is like the science apparently of studying the paranormal activities, and there was this fucking man going to this house, and you know, people were dying, horrible things were happening, and this douche was there giving us reasons why, oh, this is happening because of the sound waves and because of the light and how it turns, and you know, if you do a spin and then you move air, and then like it was coming up with such bullshit to explain the situation, which clearly this fucking house was haunted. Clearly ghosts are real when they are there in front of you, where they are strangling you with their bare hands and everybody can see them. Clearly ghosts are real, so fuck you and your parapsychology, like shut up. And instead everybody was like, well, actually, now that I think about that, that makes sense. It makes way more sense than, you know, all the marks on my neck and the fact that I actually saw the ghost strangling me. Your version of things with a bunch of scientific bullshit terms makes way more sense. Listen, if you are so dumb that you've been swallowed alive by a kind of bog monster or something, and you miraculously survive such an encounter, and you go out and tell me, no, ghosts are not real, that was the effect of the light and the vapor of the sauna and I don't even fucking know, and you don't believe, you need to die badly. I want to see you die badly. Sorry, I went on a tangent there, but I was pissed because I couldn't stand how this freaking expert kept going on with this pseudoscience where there clearly was bullshit. Like, I wished at one point he had, like, there was some development of his character. I would have acknowledged what was going on, because I found a bit absurd that he wasn't, and he never kind of did. Then I listened to My Dark Vanessa by Elizabeth Russell. This is a literary fiction, and this is the story of this girl. You follow her back when she was a teenager, and now that she's a 30-odd-ish-year-old woman, and she tells you the story of how she's being groomed and abused by one of her teachers. And now that when she's in her 30s, the story has come out, other girls have denunciated the abuse suffered by these men. She will never acknowledge the abuse when she was a child. She has not come to terms with that. Now, I want to preface this saying that this is an adult book. There are a lot of explicit sex scenes, with a grown-up 40 years old man and a teenager, which someone might find very disturbing. I was definitely uncomfortable doing them. I also just have to say that this feels quite realistic. I believe the author started writing this story when she was a teenager herself. So when we hear about Vanessa being a teen, you can resonate well with that. It feels very real. However, I think this is marketed a bit on the wrong side. This is marketed as, you know, this girl's journey on recognizing the abuse she went through. And I think she does that to a certain extent, but I think this should be marketed as how Stockholm Syndrome works. Now, this is not Stockholm Syndrome in the sense of, you know, someone abducted this girl and then she grew attached to them, but she grew attached to her abuser and she failed to see the abuse because of his attachment. That bond that was created because of their vulnerability, because of the power dynamics in there and all that. Personally, I didn't particularly like Vanessa. I'm not probably supposed to. We're not probably supposed to like her. And I wish her journey was more satisfying in the end. Instead, I thought she was very passive throughout, which is, yes, quite realistic. But if I have to be just, you know, personal opinion, I wished she was more active in all of that. I wish we went a bit farther on the recognizing the abuse. But again, it's a book that teaches you things, and it's definitely not one that I would not recommend, but it's lengthy, it's long, it's dense, and there is a lot of content that might be very triggering, so be aware of that. Then I read Wanna Go, Wanna Stay by Maria J. Scott. This is my domestic violence memoir. I've done a whole video about this and a review of this in details. This is about this woman who in the 70s moves to Atlanta. She has a boyfriend, it becomes abusive, and that's her history on how she escapes him. Then I read The Tulip Touch by Unfine. This came in a box set of YA, one of the first YA ever published or recognized as YA by Penguin, and this is a story of this girl that her father is a caretaker for a hotel. Reminded me a lot of The Shining at the beginning. And when they go there, she befriends this other young girl who lives on a farm near the hotel where they're staying, and it turns out though that this girl has very problematic behaviors, and her household and her father is very violent with her. Unfortunately, what these books does is that instead of exploring the problematic behavior but linking it all the time with abuse and giving us a story of explaining why certain behaviors might happen and the abuse behind, it just demonizes this child. And throughout the book we have our main protagonist kind of becoming friends and then getting out of that friendship and isolating this girl even more, and only like literally toward the end she feels guilty, but it's never addressed. I cannot personally condone how this woman read a book called Serial Killer for Dummies 2.0, early signs of potentially becoming a serial killer or a psychopath, and she put everything in this girl character without at any time addressing or recognizing in depth the episodes happening. So there is like the father of our protagonist who sometimes says, you know, oh, but you know, she has things at home that are difficult. Okay, do something. That's a child that's been fucking abused. So no one does anything apart from isolating this girl, demonizing her, and this girl, you follow her while she becomes increasingly worse and worse. So I gave this 1 star. Like, what is the point of this book? You're teaching me that children that abuse and act up are becoming monsters, and they're gonna be monsters, they're gonna be dangerous. Like, what are you teaching me? I'm not saying the problematic behavior in an abused child is that uncommon or that it doesn't happen, because it does happen, but the issue is not the problematic behavior, it's about you addressing what's behind that, because a child is not mean for the sake of being mean. Then I read The Perfect Father by John Glatt. This is a non-fiction, and this is my choice for the true crime of the month. This tells the story of Chris Watts, and this is the father of 2 that in 2018, I think in Colorado, if I'm not mistaken, he kills his pregnant wife, kills his 2 daughters, 3 and 4 years old. They're ended, and then tries to get away with it, and because it's a fucking dumb shit, he cannot get away with it. Basically, he's caught very easily. They do a lie detection test, it doesn't pass that, and then he confesses and all of that. So this is an in-depth of the pre-history of how they met, how they married, how they become to have kids and all of that. I'll try to be brief, because when it comes down to this, I got so much to say. This is another haunting read. Like, there is descriptions of him killing the children and the wife, and it's graphic and it's very disturbing. I was kind of shaking at the moment. I knew it was coming because I was already familiar with the story already. I'd watched the documentary on Netflix and all of that, so I knew, and still it was so freaking hard. It still sucks every time. So I'm really hoping that I've read this, and I hope I will never have to relive that moment again, because I cannot understand people so interested in him, and professionals and police officers and psychologists and all that, because Chris doesn't have a history of violence. He wasn't a violent man. He was never in trouble with the police. He never gave any hints that he was a potential murderer. Family annihilators are a very specific and unique and very rare, thank God they're very rare kind of killers that are out there. But because they are so rare, and because it's most of the time so random, that we just don't know much about them. And the fact that this man has zero precedent of being violent or threatening to be violent, like zero. It's so weird. I did have a perception that Chris was somehow on the spectrum, and from his behaviors, he felt very socially awkward. He felt like he was very introverted, and also that he has the power dynamics in the couple was very much leaning towards Shannon. So Shannon had a very bubbly personality. She lived through social media, but apparently, for what comes out of the book at least, she was a lot of times humiliating him. She was always there texting him, calling him. She was a lot, and I just could see their personality crashes a lot. Like, he was definitely submissive to her. And in my mind, that I made hypothesis of what this happened. He just decided to eliminate everything and start over with his lover, or did he honestly just lost his mind? And not justifying him. Even the detective that worked this case ended up resigning or just going in pension and going to therapy for years. This is a disgusting man who cannot even tell the truth. I don't think we got the truth at the end. It gives different accounts. This is a very insignificant man who I think was told that it was insignificant enough time that he just exploded and committed a horrible act. And I do honestly, my theory is that one of the child witnessed what was going on, and he thought in his mind, oh, now he saw me doing this, killing the mom, and now I need to kill them both, and that's the only way I can get away with it. I don't think he premeditated to kill his children. It just felt, for how I was reading it, it just felt like it was an out of the moment decision. Oh, now they saw me, the only way I can get away with it if I kill them both. Doesn't justify him. I think there is nothing worse. The most inhuman things you can do. I honestly laugh with the fact that he in the end finds God and writes all these sentences and thinks that he's gonna go ever to paradise. Bitch, if there is a paradise out there, you go in the opposite direction. Doesn't matter how many times you say sorry, doesn't matter all the letters you send. If there is a God out there, I honestly wish there is, honestly, just so you could get to hell and be punished for the rest of eternity, because that's what you deserve, and no matter how much apologies you give, like, there is no redemption from this. And also there is the same thing I mentioned regarding Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker documentary. It's mentioned about women sending him love letters after being in prison and all that. It's fucking disgusting. I really hope you're gonna go to hell with him. Again, I really hope that if there is hell and heaven, I really hope that these women and these people sending these fucking love letters to a murderer, like someone who bare-handed murdered their children while they were screaming not to do so, they honestly, they deserve a place in hell next to him. I'm sorry. Okay, let's talk about something more nice. I've read Ring. This is the Japanese horror pick for the month, and this is the famous book from which the Ring, the movie, is based on. I've never seen the movie, but I do believe honestly that it's loosely based. Like there is a lot of adaptation made in the movie. And this is the story of this journalist whose niece dies in mysterious circumstances. She's very young and she dies of this apparently heart attack, and he starts investigating for a series of events this death because other 3 people has died at the same exact time as his niece and in the same exact conditions, and they were all very young. So he started digging deep into this, and he finds this tape that he ends up watching, and turns out that this tape is cursed. So now, because of what happens to his niece, he knows that the threat of if you don't do these things, you're gonna die by the end of 7 days. The issue with God is that he doesn't know what this thing is supposed to do to stop and avoid death is gonna be, because in the tape there is like a commercial on top of instruction, so which sucks. So yes, 7 days, there is a cut down to him finding the solution and saving his life. I didn't find this scary at all. I found though very eerie sometimes, some parts. I found the plot very fascinating. I really liked where this is going. I liked the ending. I thought it was a very clever idea, and I'm looking forward to actually finish the whole trilogy, plus there is another book out. So I think it's a quartet for now, and I will definitely continue on, but these books are so expensive. I got a couple of issues to raise with these. Is one, there is a lot of misogynistic comments. The way women were treated in these sucked, and it's disturbing. So if you are particularly triggered by that, probably give this a skip. And also, with all the fucking people on earth, why do you have to enlist your alleged rapist friend to help you out? So on one side I was like, yeah, if you have to risk another life, I mean, probably that's the one you want to risk. But at the same time, I did not understand how he even was friend with a guy who allegedly did that. So that's what I mean with the misogynistic comments. Like, there was a lot of violence hinted and done to women that was not addressed appropriately, or that it was actually used and perpetrated. So just be aware that I think it was written in the 90s, so I don't know how much awareness there was back then, but still, taste its taste. Doesn't matter if it's in the 90s or whether. There is never a time where, for example, those comments should have been okay. And finally, I've probably kept you here for like an hour or so. I read Storia di chi fugge e di chi resta by Elena Ferrante. I'll put here the English cover. This is a quartet of literary fiction books by Elena Ferrante, who is an Italian author. They are all translated in English. I don't know if they won any award, but I got around to know about them from an American YouTuber. So they're all translated, and people have been saying raving things even of the English translations, so I bet they are well done. And this quartet tells us the story of Elena and Raffaella, and they are these two children. They are born in Naples, in a very poor part of Naples, between 1940 and 1950, I don't remember correctly, but you follow their histories. And the first book is their childhood, then you got second book their like adulthood, young adulthood. In these they are adult women, like 30-odd years old women, and then in fourth book you will follow them in their elderly years. And the first book starts as a flash forward to when they are 6 years old and Raffaella Lila has gone missing. And so our author, Elena, she tells us the story from their childhood to explain to us what happens then to Lila and why she disappeared. And this is amazing. Although I gave these 3.5 stars, and the reason being is that Lila, Raffaella, and this is not much present, and for how much Lila is such a bitch, she is the driving force of the story. She's such a fascinating, unlikable, and yet amazing character that I felt her absence a lot. I also didn't like the end. I didn't like Elena's choices and what she does. It's something that very much doesn't resonate well with me, so that's why I gave it 3.5 stars. But make no mistakes, this quartet, so far at least, I've not read the last one, is one of the best things I've ever read. The way this character are in me, and the way I read about them, the way this feels realistic, and it's not a biography. It feels like, a lot of people researched the author and speculated about, she must have lived through these things. She cannot write these things if she's not lived through them. And then if you look at the nuances, you can tell that actually she's just a very mastercraft of plots and characters and dialogues. Because if you notice, there are not many descriptions of places and things, so you can actually, in inside, you can tell that, okay, she's vaguely describing a city that could be any kind of city. It's realistic, but it's not a biography, and it's not biography, like it's confirmed that it's not biography, but it feels real. It's so realistic, it's so well done, it's such nice prose. Lila has got the best last words I've probably read in a long while, apart from fantasy books where there are very sassy characters. We don't have many characters as Lila. And if you like literary fiction, if you like nice prose and a story that grips you and unique characters, you cannot give this a miss. And that was it. Thank you guys. I'm gonna go. This has been so long. 17 things is so much to wrap up. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these and what you thought about them. Maybe you have completely different opinion than me. I like to have a discussion in the comments down below. Take care, guys. See you next time. Ciao.